Hello everybody, this is Naz, and today I'm painting a nebula with gouache. I want this to be kind of like a tutorial, except that this is the first time I've ever painted a nebula, and I'm pretty new to gouache as well. And also, I'm not that experienced an artist in general, so, as usual, none of this is really expert advice. That's just a disclaimer that I'm gonna put out there. So I guess what I'm doing now, I started by painting a black background, but it was kind of difficult because it was really wet, and I wanted it to be a nice thick even coat, the kind of type where the black is just so rich and it looks like you can just fall into it and all that. Well, that sounds a bit wanky, but you know what I mean. And then I discovered the merits of using a hairdryer to dry it, and I know a lot of artists do this, but because I'm new to gouache, I've never done this before, and it was so wet that the paper was burring, and you can see that the tape I'm using is not very effective. And then I left it for a day. I came back and it was still wet, and I was really annoyed at it, and it was taking forever. And then I did it with a hairbrush and it dried instantly, and oh my gosh, I was just so proud of myself. I know, it's pretty dumb, but yeah, this is the thing I do. And then I kind of started building up a nice blue haze in the middle of it. I'll put up a picture of a nebula. I didn't really have a reference, but I had a few that I looked at. But there's kind of a dense kind of cloud thing in the middle, and then there's like little folds almost, and there's wispy bits on the outside is how I see it. And then I kind of built up lots and lots of layers of stars. I just realized I should have put in some shooting stars. That would have been really cool, but I didn't. And basically the way I layered the stars was I did the haze, I did a layer of stars, and I just put dots everywhere, and then I built up some more clouds, and that covered up some of the stars, so I added more stars, and then you get a really nice gradiating thing of some which are really faint because they're covered by lots of the clouds, and some which are quite bright because they're on top. Anyway, I experimented with this kind of thing for like rays of light coming out of it, and it looks a bit like aurora, but I didn't really think it was what I was going for, so I didn't really get rid of it, but it's not that really visible in the final thing. But yeah, the way I built up the clouds, I basically just globbed on some like gouache paints in different shades of blue and kind of blended it out with water. And it's really interesting watching the video because gouache dries quite fast. I know I was complaining about how wet it was. That's because the gouache I was using was mostly water then. But the gouache paint itself dries fast if you don't if you don't dilute it too much. I'm very smart. And you can see that in the video. You can see that when I'm applying it, it's really shiny and bright, and then it fades out. And this artwork actually took me, it didn't take that long, but it's an A5 piece of paper, and it took probably about 4 hours to paint the whole thing from start to finish. And that's not including time it took to dry and all that. And I think it was because the gouache would dry a different colour to what I put on, so then I'd go back and touch it up and then it'd dry again, and it'd just be a constant battle of me trying to bring out highlights and make the dark areas recede, and then it would lose all the contrast, and it was kind of frustrating but also kind of therapeutic. So here I'm building up kind of more details in the haze, is that the right word even? But kind of just more layers of cloud, and I came up with this kind of method for blending it out, where I do like a line in a pretty light colour, normally white or light blue, at this stage anyway, depending on how far it was from the center, because I really wanted it to be lightest in the center. And then I just add water to one side of the line, usually the part that was receding and furthest away from the center, so that it would be blended. And I thought this worked really well. It made it look like you were gazing down into like a tunnel of clouds or something. So while I'm working on that in the video, I'm just going to talk about some of my inspiration for the piece, because as you know, I don't normally paint nebulae. It was just kind of random, but I had a science test recently, and it was on two topics. One of them was energy and motion, which is like Newton's laws and all that, and the other one was on the universe, and I actually really enjoyed studying the universe. We watched a Stephen Hawking documentary on it, and I just found it so mind-blowing, and it makes you feel like such a little part of a really big thing, and I find that partially scary and partially kind of comforting as well. But a lot of the visuals on the documentary were really pretty, like there were big bangs and black holes, and a lot of it was kind of hypothetical because you can't actually really visualize the black hole, but I don't know, I thought it looked really cool. Anyway, fast forward a little bit, I'm studying for science, and I'm like, okay, so stars form from giant clouds of nebula and gravity and all that kind of stuff. and then when they die, it's a supernova and they turn back into Nebula or something like that. I'm probably getting my facts way wrong, and I haven't got my marks back, so hopefully I did well. Sorry, that's a bit of a tangent, but I saw some pictures of Nebula, especially the Crab Nebula, I think is the one I saw, and I was like, whoa, that's really pretty. And I mean, I've kind of been using mostly pencil and pen since I started drawing. I mean, I've deviated from that a little bit now. A lot now, actually. I've been doing a lot of gouache because I really love it as a medium. But I used to always have trouble drawing things like stars, and you know when you have clouds and it's kind of sunny behind it and you can see the rays coming through like at sunrise and all that. I tried to draw that once and it went really badly. And I think it's just because like being black and white, it's a lot harder to capture the way the light works. I mean, it does do light and all that, but I'm just imagining taking a photograph of the light coming through clouds kind of thing. I think it's like slang named the fingers of God. I think that's a pretty apt name. Anyway, and turn into black and white, and it wouldn't look the same at all. So I think doing with color was really interesting because I was expecting it to be a lot more difficult than it was, and not that it wasn't difficult, but I wasn't expecting to be able to do it at all. I did find a really nice acrylic painting of a nebula which I used as some inspiration, and I'll put a link to that tutorial in the description. So here you can see me working on the little wispy bits because I was really happy with the clouds I managed to build up, but I felt like it still didn't look like the nebula I'd pictured because they all had these kind of wisps just like floating around them. Here's an example that you can see. The way I started building it up was I had kind of three main ropes, I suppose you could call it, and these were like kind of white and yellow, and I put black in between to just emphasize the empty space part of it, I guess. And they kind of go around the center and curve out and come back to it, so it's like pretty like radial, I guess. And then from there I just kind of did almost little hairs coming off it, which I kind of continuously added. Some of them were yellow, some of them were white, and some of them were green. Speaking of which, that leads me into kind of talking about my color scheme. So I wanted it to be kind of mostly blue, but as I said, I didn't really use a specific reference picture, but I did have a couple of pictures that really inspired me and I wanted to work from. And yeah, the one that I really liked was blue and green and yellow. And I noticed that the green gouache doesn't stand out as much, which is kind of sad, but I think just the blue and yellow works pretty well as well. So I started off with mostly blue and white, and then I kind of gradually mixed in some yellows with the whites so that it would, you know, pop out a bit, I guess. And then the green was kind of receded into the background more because I didn't realize how faint it would be, but it also worked as a nice kind of like thing to pull together a lot of the colors I used. I'm sorry, you can see my head coming in and out of the video a little bit here, and that's because it's a pretty small image and it was hard for me to see it without leaning in a little bit. So I missed a bit of footage because I think I was working on it and I pressed record on the camera, or I didn't, but either way it didn't record. And here I'm kind of adding some more detail to the wispy bits. I'm glad that the little lines I put in receded eventually, because I feel like, especially on that particular rope, I overdid it a little bit. But the next one I worked really well. I only did a couple of those little bits that point inwards and it looked really nice. So yeah, at this point I was really loving how it was going. And okay, so I mean, this video is actually a bit late. It was meant to go out on last Monday, but I just had a really busy weekend and it didn't happen. I didn't even have anything to upload. I hadn't recorded it by then. And I mean, I guess in general, you know, life is life. Stuff happens. And I've also just come back from Europe, and it was so nice. It was a music tour, and it was really pretty as well. But for some reason, like, after coming back from Europe, it was almost like I'd kind of lost my flow with drawing. I did keep a travel journal while I was there, but normally, like, I would be working on something and more ideas will pop into my head and I'll write them down quickly so I don't forget them, and then when I finish it, I'll be able to work on those. So I've got, like, a really nice flow of how I get my ideas, but it was almost like taking a huge break of drawing. Well, it was only 2 weeks, but for me, that feels like a huge break from drawing. But yeah, so I think I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things after that, but it was so worth it. So here I'm kind of adding some black in between the rays of light that are coming out, and that's because like I realized that it might be getting a little bit too bright, and I really wanted it to have a lot of contrast, so I used some black, and later I used some Prussian blue, that blue, you guys all know what it is hopefully, and that was kind of just to add more details, which you can see really works here, especially in small. It's really different looking at it on a screen as opposed to in real life actually. But anyway, this kind of helped me bring out more contrast and just kind of balance the lights and blacks. From here onwards, I'm kind of just adding finishing touches, and so it was a little bit tedious because it'd just be coming back and forth, but that's okay. So again, missed a little bit of footage, but you can see me adding in a couple of larger stars, and this is something that I saw in a couple of the reference pictures I used. My throat is getting really dry. Okay. And so I did this, and then I had to add a lot more highlights around the stars because I realized that the stars emanate light, which means the clouds around them should be lighter as well. But then because they were kind of close to the center, and the center was also light, then it'd just be lots and lots of light stuff, which I found kind of hard to balance. But it worked out in the end eventually, I think. Like, because the highlights I did around the stars kind of faded out, whereas I made the highlights around the center pop out quite a bit. And I think that worked well. Also, you might have noticed that I did take off the tape. That's because the paper was borrowing so much from the initial layers I put on that the tape just wasn't doing anything at all. And, I mean, normally it's meant to keep the edges of the painting really crisp, but you can see how weird it is along the edges, and that's because I put on so much water in the start that it actually seeps through the paper underneath the tape, which is kind of annoying, but, I mean, it's not like I'm selling this, unless anyone wants it anyway. If you do, just shoot me an email, I'd be happy to give it to you. But yeah, as a whole, I really enjoyed this as an exercise. I think I developed my skills with gouache as well as working on my patience, because with drawing I used to kind of do faster things. I mean, I know some people who do hyperrealism, like, they can spend 8-9 hours on it, but most of my artworks take 3 or 4 hours, which this one did. But the whole thing with building up layers upon layers upon layers was really new to me, and I found it helpful, I guess, and I'm really looking forward to using these techniques in future. That's about it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.